This past weekend was the annual Midsummer Scream Halloween and Horror Convention. As part of the convention, I hosted a panel about the 2016 interactive subscription game Dizney's Ghost Post, based on characters and tales from the Haunted Mansion. For $199, you could sign up and receive a package each month for 3 months. Inside the packages were collectibles and artifacts from the Haunted Mansion, and you had to help save the day with these items through various tasks and illusions. It was certainly an ambitious project, but not one that many people know about. You see, only 999 of them were ever made, and they were practically gone before they even went on sale. You'll hear how that happened, and so much more, in the following conversation with Kevin Lively and Cory Doctorow, who are both writers on this project. Live from Midsummer Scream, this is the making of Dizney's Ghost Post.
Kindly raise your volume, please. Jeff has plenty of Disney chatter for everyone. There's no turning back now.
My name is Jeff DePaoli. I'm the host of the Disney Coast to Coast podcast, and I'm super excited to have this panel because I have a feeling some of you have probably never even heard of this thing. So there's a lot to learn here because it was like top secret, really rare, and it's going to be a lot of fun. But I want to introduce our guests today. A member of the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame. He's the author of the science fiction novel Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom and a writer on the Disney Ghost Post project, among many other credits. Please welcome Cory Doctorow. Also joining me is a man who spent many years writing for Walt Disney Imagineering, where he became an authority figure, this is a cool gig, an authority figure on all things Jungle Cruise and Haunted Mansion, and is, of course, another writer on this special Ghost Post project. Please welcome Kevin Lively. Well, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to start super basic here because these guys are, not only were they assigned on this project, but they're big Haunted Mansion fans. So I just want to start with the basics. Like, what was your first experience with Haunted Mansion or that moment you realized, okay, this is kind of life-changing for me? Let's start with Kevin.
So when you texted me the other day and you're like, hey, what's your earliest Haunted Mansion memory? I actually had to dig back. And strangely enough, it was a dream when I was like 5 or 6. Yeah, hang on. This is a weird one. So when you walk into the foyer at Disneyland's mansion and you have stretching room, 2 of those here, there's a door on the right-hand side, which I now know is like the VIP access, right? It's a little side door. But when you're a kid, you didn't know what that was. So I had a dream when I was a kid that I went through that door. There was a big ballroom and the Ghostbusters were in there. Yeah, and they're busting a giant ghost. That's my earliest Haunted Mansion memory. But yeah, being able to be part of that team that was able to touch upon, one of Walt's last projects, carrying on that legacy, super awesome and proud of my work with that.
Very cool. Cory, for you?
So yeah, I mean, my origin story is also that I was bitten by a radioactive haunted mansion when I was 6 years old and became the man I am today. I grew up in Toronto. My grandparents were Fort Lauderdale snowbirds. And they lived in a gate-guarded seniors community called Century Village that my dad used to call Cemetery Village. And when we would go down for a Christmas break, there was nothing to do. So we'd get my grandfather's air-conditioned land yacht and drive to Disney World. And so the first time we went, it was 76, and they still had A through E tickets. And we were down to our last E, and reading through, they used to give you basically like a thick hardcover phone book explaining what Disney rides were, because this was the 70s when all of this stuff was very new. And my dad was going through the book, and we get to the Haunted Mansion e-ticket, and he reads the description aloud. My mother says, well, I think Cory would be too young for that. Of course, I insisted that we go. We went. It was perfect. It was the last ride of the night. There was only a couple of teenagers there. The cast member opened the mansion door, was chewing the scenery, Master Gracie requests more bodies, she was incredible. We had an incredible ride. I mean, you know what it's like. We had an incredible ride. And this was in the absolute glory peak era of Disney Mansion merch. And so they had the gift shop at the head/end of the queue there. And I mortgaged my allowance to the year 2075 to buy sort of the entire stock of weird Randotti sculptural elements and tombstones and so on. And the very brief moment in which you could get the changing cards that fluoresced that had that were sort of echoes of the portrait gallery, never been offered for sale on eBay until like last year, and they were $1,500 each, and I wasn't going to buy them. So then our car broke down on the way back to Fort Lauderdale that night, and the auto club sent out a replacement car, and I had slept through this, and I got carried into the other car. I woke up on my grandparents' sofa in Lauderdale, and first words out of my mouth was, "Where is my Haunted Mansion stuff?" And it was gone. And I never got it again. And so this is why I am now 52 years old. And so this is why for the last 46 years, I have been chasing Haunted Mansion merch and stuff.
That's also why you never drive anywhere now.
That's right. Yeah, never. Or sleep.
Or sleep.
Yeah.
It's more like a villain origin story.
Well, thanks for that happy little story, Cory. Folks, show of hands here. Who has never even heard of the Disney Ghost Post project from 2016? Anybody here who is completely unfamiliar? We got a few of you. Okay. No idea. Great. How many of you tried to buy it and couldn't get it? Okay. Yeah, this guy too, if you can believe it. Yep. And then any of you actually get it and experience it? Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Well, Haunted Mansion fans are pretty rabid. And so, yeah, it got 999 people, because they only made 999 of them, to buy this interactive mystery game. It was a 3-month kind of event. It cost $199, and each month you got one of those packages, and it told this whole crazy story. But yeah, it sold like insanely fast.
The store that they were selling it through, which I don't think is still up anymore, had a pretty primitive content management system. And at midnight, they would add new SKUs, and it would just increment a counter at the end of the URL. So it'd be like disneystore.com/merchandise SKU equals 1121, and then at midnight it'd be like 1122 and 1123. And there was someone who had a Disney blog who had a script that ran every night at 12:01 and just incremented up that URL to see what there was. And they saw the ghost post. The press release was going up the next morning at 9 a.m. They blogged it at midnight, and more than 900 of them were sold before the press release went out. So it basically never went on sale. Like, it was basically sold out before it went on sale.
And that's why I had Cory tell the story, because my version is people cheated.
Because Kevin, like you
incrementing a URL is not cheating.
They gamed the system.
Kevin, you really wanted one, and you worked on this, and you never got it.
Yeah, they ran out. They gave them. They they sold the ones through, and the executives got some. Cory got one. Yeah, it's all right. It's cool.
Cool.
My wife is like, it's fine. There's less stuff in my house.
You can come over and see mine anytime you want.
Oh, we can play Haunted Mansion.
We can play Haunted Mansion.
Yay!
I also have the old 70s board game.
That's cool.
That one. That's a good one.
I'll bring my Adventureland board game, and we'll have a nerd night.
Excellent.
This is sad, man.
We can try and solve the Haunted Mansion puzzle box together. I have one of those.
Ooh, wow.
There's plenty of Haunted Mansion merch, yes. So the story of the game was this. It's an event known as the Great Unraveling has come to the Haunted Mansion and is becoming an increasingly dangerous problem for the ghosts and ghouls. Usually able to travel freely away from the mansion when following mortals home, the spirits find themselves trapped within the grounds by a spectral fog that prevents souls from leaving or arriving, a fog that only the ghosts can witness. With their ability to haunt increasingly diminished, and the mists growing ever more oppressive, and with many phantoms lost to an unknown fate, a concerned group known as the Committee of Wandering Ghosts contacts the Ghost Relations Department in a bid to find mortals particularly attuned to the spirit world to help them with their predicament. So that's all of you. Now, I am curious, did either of you have any involvement with that concept?
Yeah, so we iterated through a whole bunch of different ideas. That a big portion of the story design turned on some of the self-performing tricks that we were planning on doing. So we worked with Derek Delgadio, who's the great magic props maker, the sort of by appointment to every important magician in Vegas kind of guy. And he had a lot of ideas for ways that we could manufacture self-performing tricks that would do more than one thing. So there's an element of it where there's a piece of it that starts as a key that you use to read hidden text, and then it becomes a piano roll that you put through a music box, and so on and so on. And so we had all these different ideas, and then we kind of built a story around those constraints. It's in some ways, it's a very kind of reminiscent of the syncretic process by which cast members have grafted stories onto the mansion for years and years, where you have these effects that were kind of kicking around, and some of them are Claude Coates's, and some of them are Davis's, and some of them are thrown in later. And when you go through the California mansion, there's things that are stenciled WDW because at the last minute they didn't ship them to Florida and they just stuck them in California, and all of that stuff. People later kind of grafted the story onto it. And there is an interesting kind of blended story that emerges when you're working around those constraints. I mostly write science fiction novels. I have a colleague who's a gun person. I'm a Canadian, so I'm not a gun person. Who once told me and our students, if you write a story with a gun in it, the gun people will go crazy trying to find ways that you're wrong. But if you add the word modified before you put the gun in, the gun people will go crazy trying to figure out what cool idea you had. And it's those holes in the story that leave the space for the imagination. And I always thought the incoherence of the mansion is one of the things that makes it so compelling, because there really are, like, if you go back to the original prospectus and so on, there's so many different stories that were eventually blended into it that it really invites you to kind of fill in the blanks.
Very cool. I'm going to play this video, and maybe you guys can talk a little bit about the things we're going to see. There's no audio here, but this is some of the stuff that you got in the packages that would arrive at your home. So there was this envelope. There was always secret messages. But the cool thing was that, like, these sheets of paper weren't just sheets of paper. They all had multiple purposes. The Grimm Gazette, each package had one of those, which was, of course, it's a newspaper. It's full of writing. This invitation, if you put it in the freezer, you'd have to freeze it, and a whole new ghostly message would show up. Then there was the Phantom Radio, which was made from your cell phone, and magnets, and this reflective teacup.
It was made in China.
Made in China, that's right.
Where all the best ghosts are made.
So it's pretty darn cool, and you'll see it says this is where you have to dampen the paper, and you'll see as you do, the ghostly message comes out. So guys, you're doing a crap ton of writing for this thing. There's this, but then there's the voiceover, which we'll get into, but there was a ton of writing.
So the bulk of the writing came from Cory and the Imagineers over at R&D.
R&D
is research and development. And so they did a bulk of the writing. And since I was the kind of a story specialist for the story development team, my building was actually a couple blocks away in 1401. And so I was, over the years, to Cory's point, is the Haunted Mansion since the 1960s, even before that, or early 1960s when they were building it, didn't open on time. All these urban legends started popping up as to why. And that kind of continued for years. And it works perfectly for the mansion because it is like that spooky house in your neighborhood that none of the kids want to go near. This whole haunted house mythology kind of just evolved from there. But over the years, Imagineering had never really checked off or kept tabs on all these stories. And so that's why you see comic books that had, one character with this name, but then you go to a different source and there's that character has a different name. And so there was no official logging of any of this in the Imagineering archives. And there was a file box I was kind of like the guardian of. I hope it's still intact. I'm not Imagineering anymore. So hopefully they're still taking care of it. But it had like documentation from like the 1960s. So I was going through old notes with like Marty Sklar and John Hench, scribbles on it, basically to pick through and trying to target what things Imagineering did intend back in the 1960s, and then trying to then take everything that had been created along the way to start molding it in together to one cohesive starting point. That way we can kind of start taking control of this IP, because it was kind of like the Wild West. It was like that for a lot of the attractions and stories for Imagineering original IP. So that was where my involvement came in. So after their team went through and they kind of started coming through, I would kind of review it, make any notes, very mild at that. But a big part of it was, trying to track down those official names for ghosts that you see throughout the mansion. Ezra, Phineas, and Gus, as much as we all know the hitchhiking ghosts as Ezra, Phineas, and Gus, not official in Imagineering documentation anywhere. I combed everywhere.
Until we made it official.
And yeah, so we made it canon. And so what I did is, I mean, I was looking, I'm like, I'm just a low level writer. I'm honored to work on this project, but guys, like, I can't rubber stamp this myself. So I worked with Tom Fitzgerald, who started his career working as a cast member at the Mansion, and Bob Weiss, who was the president at the time. And we kind of held hands together, and we figured out their official names, which are now Ezra Bean, Professor Phineas Plump, and Gus. And with that, we also created super basic 1 or 2 sentence backstories as to not write ourselves into a corners for future opportunities. So Ezra Bean was a vagabond, like the old classic, hobo riding the rails and stealing apple pies off the windowsill. Professor Phineas Clump, the shorter guy, was a snake oil salesman who partook in his own snake oil and didn't work out for him. And Gus basically served a prison sentence for a crime he didn't commit as part of the A-Team, I suppose. But yeah, so that we gave them little short official backstories like that. And along the way, as we'll talk about the other characters who we officially put name tags on for Imagineering moving forward. And it's crazy now because Hallmark is coming out with these ornaments, and like the organist is there. I'm like, oh my god, that's the name I wrote. It's just pretty cool.
That's super cool. And up to that point, like the Hitchhiking Ghosts in particular kind of had fan names.
Fan names, and that got when it came to other partners using it, it was a lot easier to do a Google search.
Corey's taking notes. This is good.
No, people go to Google, like, what are the names of the Hitchhiking Ghosts? And that's a lot quicker than picking up the phone and calling Imagineering and be like, hey, what are the names of the Hitchhiking Ghost?
If I called Imagineering and asked that question, would they answer?
Well, if you were from Disney Publishing and it was a direct, tie line.
Fair enough.
Yes. But yeah, so that's where it was kind of like the Wild West with things kind of just going astray. But yeah, that's...
And this syncretic storytelling stuff happens all the time. So my editor at First Second, who do my graphic novels, is a great woman named Callista Brill, and she worked for Disney Publishing for a while, or maybe for a contractor downstream of them. But she was called up one day to say, we secretly commissioned 2 different teams to write Bibles for the Tinkerbell universe without telling each other that they were both working on competing projects. Your job is to make a single unified lore out of it, which if you've ever paid attention to the Tinkerbell lore, it's bananas. And that's why, right? It's this syncretic process. I wrote a little on the Kitchen Sink Haunted Mansion comics series. And again, it was just like, pick a ghost, make up a backstory, we'll do a comic for it. So I picked like really weird ghosts. I picked the skulls flying out of the organ in the ballroom and the disembodied chuckle when you come off the unload belt. And I created a unified lore about where the disembodied chuckle was the school bus driver for the choir kids who are the skulls coming out of the thing who behaved so badly that chuckling madly to himself, he drove the bus over a cliff and killed them all.
That is amazing.
Yeah, there's a really good 2-page spread of him in the front of the bus and all the kids misbehaving behind it. It's sort of an Al Jaffe tribute. It's really good.
That's darker than my Hatbox Ghost story I wrote.
Wow.
Yeah, so this wasn't for Disney, right? It's for Kitchen Sink. We got to play games. This is before Marvel, was integrated and they got all the comics.
That's wild. So, Kevin, you were at Walt Disney Imagineering, so it makes sense for you to be pulled into a project like this. Corey, you were not. So how exactly did you become involved?
Artist in residence jointly at Blue Sky, where Kevin was at WDI and at R&D. So I had a cross appointment. But it was so I wrote Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, which is about fans taking over the Haunted Mansion in a post-scarcity utopian far future society. And that became a thing that a bunch of Imagineers read and enjoyed. And then I wrote a book called Makers about a kind of super financialized Disney World that makes war on people who build impromptu theme parks and dead Walmarts using 3D printers, and where the villains are Disney IP lawyers, and the Disney IP lawyers loved that book. So I signed a case of them for Disney IP lawyers. And so I just ended up with all these friends in the business and ended up sort of coming and doing talks and doing some consulting. And then I came and did this residency. And then off the back of that, I got some, and I still do a little contract work here and there for them.
Now, listen, Disney merchandising, there's tons of it, but this was very unique. And I'm kind of curious, do either of you know why this exists, why it started?
So this was part of an effort called the Story Box effort, basically to see how you can extend the park stories outside the berm and even like leading to your vacation and get you all hyped up and excited. It was a play test for all intents and purposes, and it kind of survived in different forms after this. I did a very light version of this for the Disney Floral team. When you book a Disney World vacation and you have like decorations put in your room, they did like a Star Wars version of that. It was a very, very light version of this. But other than that, I don't think it survived.
Well, its lineage is really down to Sarah Thatcher, who's quite brilliant.
Genius.
And lovely. And Sarah is a LARP person, does a lot of Nordic LARP, a lot of interactive storytelling. She worked at R&D.
Live action role play.
Live action role playing. Best known for having built the Star Wars Hotel. And Sarah was always really interested in how there could be storytelling outside the berm and also storytelling between the rides. Mm-hmm. So, we think of Disneyland as being very crowded, but even on a very crowded day, most of the space is empty, right? Most of the space is just people going from one place to another and not doing a thing. Maybe you stop and watch a parade. Maybe you see a player, doing some Old West shtick outside of Frontierland, but there's not a lot going on. And her idea was that we could build a kind of richness into the interstitial spaces that would give people a reason to be there. Disney has, I think the original sin was when Knott's Berry Farm went to an all-you-can-eat ticket and then Disney followed them to an all-you-can-eat ticket. It suddenly became this thing where it was just standing in lines all day and standing in lines for the same rides all day. And also people who'd been lots knew which line to get in. And so the people who didn't, who were there for the first time, maybe for the first family vacation ever to Disney, the one they saved up for, couldn't figure out how to get on the e-ticket rides. And it was really, sort of victim of its own success. And so figuring out how to do stuff everywhere else, one of my favorite pieces of trivia is there's a pro forma accounting for every square foot of the park for the revenue it generates. The lowest generating revenue spaces are the places you park your stroller. But does anyone want to guess what the highest revenue generating per square foot things at the parks are?
Any guesses? You said popcorn carts?
Popcorn carts, nope. No,
Emporium?
Emporium. Pavement on Main Street, nope. Squash penny machines.
The squash penny machines? Are you kidding me?
They just ingest dollars all day long. They don't even need electricity.
No cast member?
No cast member, nothing. You even supply the penny. Right? It's just a machine for turning bored people into dollars. So figuring out how to generate stuff in all that space. If you think of this as a fixed asset that is mostly fallow, this is a way to think about the business case for it. And for Sarah, who's really smart about how people experience stories, it was I think a big part of it. So Sarah worked on what was the Walt one called? The Optimist?
Yeah, the Optimist, which was a really cool one that basically led to D23 Expo for the big climax.
A great LARP. There were secret messages in Walt's favorite table at his restaurant. You had to go to the restaurant and you look under the table to get the secret messages and stuff.
It was like a step sibling to the Tomorrowland movie.
Yeah.
So, of course, there was tons of writing to do in regard to all of this paperwork and the stuff in the package, but there was also a ton to do for voiceover. And I'm curious, we were talking a little earlier about how you gave the official names to the Hitchhiking Ghosts and others. Mm-hmm. Had we ever heard their voices before, or was that casting really the first time?
Yeah, I don't think prior to that we did. Brian Efsky is the guy who helped out. And so Brian basically, we told him what we were looking for, and he sent me a list of his usual go-tos. And when I was a kid, I wanted to be a voiceover artist. That was my first, what do you want to be when you grow up? That was what I wanted to be. So I'm always kind of nerded out on the side over that stuff. And so when he sent over the list of talent, I'm like, oh, yeah. So the voice of Ezra, our vagabond, he offered up Pete Renaday. If you're any Disney park nerds in here, he's the voice of Henry the Bear from the Country Bear Jamboree. Great voice.
The only part movie says it is.
So yeah, Pete Renaday, and then we had Steve Stanton playing Phineas. He sounded kind of like a Barney Rubble-esque. And then we brought in D. Bradley Baker as the voice of Gus, and D actually pulled double duty as the voice of Victor, our German pipe organist. So Victor Geist is also D. Bradley Baker.
Good name.
Yeah, thank you. But yeah, it was oh yeah, doesn't he play a German goldfish on American Dad? And it was very, very similar to that. Other great talent we got to bring in was Edie McClurg, who was the voice of Pearly Gates, our editrix. I saw that name. I'm like, what? We also had, I'm blanking on her, April Ortiz. When you go on Haunted Mansion Holiday, it's not the voice of Eleanor Audley doing Madame Leota for that show. They had another voice. And when you listen side by side with that Madame Leota with classic Eleanor Audley voice, they're not similar, like especially if you hear them back to back. So we wanted to take a look and see if we could recast that. And April Ortiz nailed it. She sounds identical to Eleanor Audley.
Very cool. So let's take a listen to some of the voiceover work that I'm going to assume one of you wrote.
Sally Slater, there is no need for all the shouting.
Victor, it's done. They've done it. Oh, yes, this is quite wonderful.
What was done? By whom?
Why, the Ghost Relations Department, of course. They've sent the boxes.
The boxes? The boxes? The boxes. Why, yes, of course, the boxes. But wait, the boxes, the contents, they actually sent the haunted items to mortals?
Precisely.
This plan is full of perilousness. Just think of it. All that spectral power in the hands of foolish mortals.
It's true, but honestly, what choice did the committee have? Things are desperate. More desperate than most of the ghosts know.
Is it as bad as the gossip says then, Miss Slater?
Worse, I'm afraid.
Well, there's nothing to be done now except hope for the best. Please to be keeping your bones crossed, yeah?
Don't say that! It's terrible bad luck.
Bad luck? Why is the bad luck? Superstitions are for the living, my dear.
So yeah, that was a sample of the Ghost Post audio. And when we record it, you have to, because it is a game being played by a foolish mortal, you have to have answers to different responses. So the script for that show was about that thick. And then you're doing multiple takes, finding the perfect one. We're able to record all the Hitchhiking Ghosts together, though. So that was a awesome blessing.
That's super rare.
Yeah.
Folks don't get, like, voice actors these days are usually alone in a booth, even if they're doing a scene with like 5 other people. That's pretty cool that they got to do that.
Yeah, that was pretty rad, watching them all play together. There's a scene where they're all playing pool together, where it's mostly just Gus messing around in the background. And we just let them have fun. And then if they went too wild, we're like, all right, let's do it again. Just tone it back a little bit more. But we encourage them to play and have fun.
So I argued against audio at first, which I think I was wrong about. But I thought that having a set of fully mechanical self-working tricks that would work even when the website didn't exist anymore would confer a certain sort of durability and like interestingness to this thing. I worry that so much of our interactive stuff is really like disappears down the memory hole. You think about games and now, of course, D+ and other movies that are just going away as studios seek tax advantage treatment for writing off stuff. It just feels like, as someone who like loves archives and loves lore and history and so on, it feels like there was this risk that we would create something that was so contingent and situated in its moment and would just disappear completely forever. That said, the trade-off is that when you make things that are super contingent and of their moment and use their own technology, you get something quite amazing. I have a set of paper 45s that are printed on heavily waxed paper for Disneyland that were given at the 64 World's Fair.
Wow.
That will play, 10 times, but they will play. And there's something quite magic about them,
Very cool. Now, that was a very small sampling. I'm telling you, there's hours of voiceover, plus the newspapers, plus the letters, plus the ghost messages on the letters. Like, I can't iterate enough. There's an insane amount of writing that went into this project, and it's quite impressive. But one of the things that's interesting is there are like magic tricks in this game that, the player needs to listen and needs to do these things correctly in order for the trick to pull off. How much testing was done with that? How many rewrites had to be done to make sure that like the layman could do this and make it work?
I wasn't involved in that stage. I think Derek Delgadio had a handle on it.
Yeah, from my memory, everything went back to Derek for all that stuff.
I mean, he's really good at this stuff, and self-working tricks are amazing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is like every kid who spends their allowance like me at the Main Street Magic Shop buys a bunch of self-working tricks that work really well, and then a book full of things that aren't self-working tricks that, unless you are just going to spend 100 hours in front of a mirror seeing if you can make a nickel disappear, will never work. And the self-working tricks they really do feel like magic. I mean, they're great.
Derek's amazing. This next slide here, you can see like these cards came, and the really cool thing was these cards came in, I believe, the first package, but they all had different sets. And he would use these cards to create these tricks, and it'd say shuffle them, put them, in this order. But like you could make decisions along the way, and by the end of the trick, like the spirits would be separated from the living characters, and you're like, wait a sec, how the hell did I just do that when I made my own personal decision? So
Insane.
It was pretty wild, some of the stuff that went on here. But when you talk about writing and language for the Haunted Mansion, it all goes back to Exitensio, right? The man who wrote a lot of the original Haunted Mansion with lines like, your cadaverous pallor betrays an aura of foreboding.
Yep.
And like, it's just language that is not normal, but has become so iconic now. Did you feel any pressure to like live up to that, and or were you inspired by it at all?
I would say inspired. Yeah, writing in place of X was pretty cool. I think the nicest performance review I ever received, somebody said, if I could learn to draw, I could be the next X. I'm like, that's like the nicest compliment I've ever received. And so kind of like digging into his style, his vocabulary, his cadence, his tone, all that stuff, trying to replicate it. And even with the naming of the characters, I try to take on kind of adapting that Mark Davis sense of humor. And so you look at Ezra Bean, right? He's Ezra Bean because he's long like a green bean. Phineas Plump, short and plump, things like that. And then we even pulled names from the crypts. So things that were already established, like Pearl E. Gates, Sally Slater was pulled from one of the crypts. But yeah, trying to make sure we capture that tone, but also the X voice, you can kind of say, is the voice of Ghost Relations. So when writing when I was sprucing up the dialogue for the scripts, I wasn't necessarily married to that. For me, it was kind of like, what's the best show? How can we have fun and keep people engaged? Like one of my favorite lines a hitchhiking ghost say is, I'm itching for some hitching. Like that's just fun. I mean, I don't know if X would have gone that route, but Kevin did. And so I wanted to make sure I had my own voice in there too.
I am so steeped in the dialogue from that and the old acetates and so on. As a teenager, I obsessively tracked that stuff down and read it and listened to it. It used to be that if you went to City Hall, you could request a lyric sheet that they would hand to you. It was like a mimeographed typed lyric sheet. And just going through and finding all the little clever rhymes and so on in Grim Grinning Ghost, but also in Yo-Ho, A Pirate's Life for me and his other music, was something I was very obsessed with. And then later on in life, the thing that the internet does is it lets weirdos find other weirdos who are like them, for better and for worse. Some of those weirdos want to carry tiki torches. But the thing that I found were two particularly gifted archivists of mansion lore. One is the writer of Long Forgotten blog. I don't know if any of you read Long Forgotten. It's a stellar blog tracking down their influences because, of course, originality is just filing the serial numbers off. So Atencio, didn't invent that voice, right? He synthesized it out of the pulps of the era and a bunch of other sort of Gothic material. It's like, in some ways, it's like the thrice brewed tea of Edgar Allan Poe strained through a Mad magazine, right? And it's in all the best ways. Mm-hmm. And then Fox Nolte, who was a Mansion cast member for a long time, her Long Forgotten or her Passport to Dreams Old and New blog is astounding. And then her book about the mansion, Boundless Realm, that came out afterwards, really confirmed a lot of my suspicions about where all of these influences came from. And it was a lot of the same pulp monster stuff that I grew up loving,
Very, very cool. Now, this was kind of like a radio play in a sense, plus additional text. And like you were saying earlier, you need to write responses in case people do things incorrectly and all this stuff. Did you have like one of those classic bulletin boards with the yarn connecting things and like figuring stuff out that way? Or how did you like just organize it?
Luckily, the R&D team had that done for me already.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I was able to like I really got to go in there, and I just got to put the frosting and sprinkles on the cake. So there was still a lot of frosting and a lot of sprinkles, but that most of the heavy lifting was done,
That
which was
feels
great.
like something Sarah would have had just a handle on. I don't know for sure, but like I would give odds that
Yeah.
Sarah just like had a process for that. Because, in addition to all the Disney stuff she's done, she does so much independent interactive theater and LARPing all over the world, including going to like Scandinavia for weeks at a time to do crazy Viking Nordic LARPs.
That's right. And she would bring us baked goods during recording sessions.
Oh, very good.
Yeah,
Sarah
which
is
is
like just brilliant.
Yeah.
So I brought a little something from one of the packages today, if y'all would like to see it. I'm telling you, these packages were cool and full of so much stuff. And one of them was like a music box, which I happen to have.
All right, we're going to start bidding now. Oh, yeah, this was beautiful.
And you saw a little bit earlier the papers with all the holes punched into it. And what was so cool was that started where you had to line it up with the Gazette and a different message would come through. But then, oh, by the way, if you want to show them that, there's one of your newspapers. But the holes came as one sheet. You eventually would break them up into separate sheets, and then you'd play them through the music box.
And the graphic design on the newspaper, it's David Malky, who you might know from the webcomic Wondermark. He's really funny. His Sea Lion comic is legend.
I'll hold the mic up to it, so perhaps we can lift the top. And then you can flip it over and make different music.
If you play it backwards, it tells you one of the ghost names is Paul.
Hold the mic for me. Hold the mic for me. It's amazing.
So some of it sounded like stuff you haven't heard. Others, then it would turn into different music. So it's pretty cool. I mean, these kits are, like you said, kind of rare. Only $999.
Yeah, I want to show off the back of the Grim Gazette, because I remember when Sarah first showed me the tea leaf thing, because
it
came with that made in China teacup. It was mirrored on the side, so if you were to place it upside down right here, a message would appear in the reflection of the teacup. Another clue for your journey. I thought that was super rad.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that was really cool, I know we're all like super into the technology these days of just like scanning a QR code, but as you kind of saw at the beginning of when the voiceover started in that video, you could scan these items and it like recognized the item. I'm sure there are like little codes and stuff hidden in here, but it's not like an obvious QR code. And it was just so neat. You'd hover that over the phone and then this like whole activation would begin. It was pretty spectacular.
Yeah, I think that I will cop once again to having been completely wrong on this. I really didn't want to do any of that stuff. I really didn't want the phone involved at all. I kind of felt like, you made my phone do a thing is pretty dull in the year, 2016 or whatever. But Derek and Sarah were right. They had the right vision there.
Excellent. Now there were glow-in-the-dark elements. There was, a really cool, like, small bust projection box. If you're familiar in the graveyard in the Haunted Mansion, you'd, like, the phone would reflect and create a tiny version of that for your home. And the cool thing was the packages built on each other each month. It wasn't like, second package came, just playing with the second package this month. It would be like, no, you need that mug or that teacup.
Don't throw anything away.
Don't throw anything away because it's worth a lot of money. And you're going to need it the following month. So it was just so cool how it built upon each other. Now, if you got these 3 packages and you played the game, you had a fantastic time. But if you were lucky enough to live near Disneyland, near the Haunted Mansion, there was a whole other activation that was crazy. But you had Esmeralda on Main Street that would interact.
And the compass behind the fish and chip shop.
There was so much stuff going on.
4 total, I think.
Yeah, there was...
And the Frontierland Calliope. Yeah.
And the Palm Parlor steps.
Yeah, so there were these things that existed in Disneyland for the most part that if you were, you had the app open, it recognized it. It started doing something completely different than normal, which is like expensive, let's face it. And to do this for just 999 people who, let's face it, I'd say 20% maybe actually ended up in the park. So a small amount of people. It's a huge investment. And I'm just curious if you have any stories about that.
Well, it's a prototype, right? So the idea here was to see, what interest would there be? How much could we do it? Would operations be able to manage it? Remember, Imagineering and operations are best frenemies. You've got a group of people who want to build big, ambitious things, and you've got a group of people who want to make sure nothing breaks. And there's an intrinsic tension between those things. So, kind of figuring out internally and testing against the audience what would happen. And the idea was to have a kind of pro forma accounting that said, well, what if we were to do this with another, with a film or a franchise where we could do 10x that number of units? Mm-hmm. How would the unit costs come down, and what could we do? And how, if we amortize the engineering costs associated with changing a ride, what would that look like at 20,000 units instead of 999 or whatever? That was the kind of thinking when you're prototyping. That's the way you think about it. It was really exciting. I went through it with Sarah, and she came and showed me all of the things because I don't have an iPhone, so I couldn't make any of it work. And it was very exciting, and it built on something from the Optimist, because it was the Optimist that did this first, where there was a Calliope, a mechanical machine that changed based on how far you'd progressed in the Optimist.
Yeah, I know their overall design mission was to not break anything that was already in the park, and don't make something that looks exclusive. It needs to be something that can be discovered by the people who need to discover it. But if you walk by and you're like, hey, here's a big arrow to an activation. If you want to do this, it costs, $199. Well, that's a big dissatisfier to everybody who couldn't do it. But
apparently adding Spider-Man changes the calculus.
Leave that alone.
Too soon.
No, but it is interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the cool elements was if you went on the Haunted Mansion, got in your Doom buggy, you got different ride audio. If you had the app open, you had to show a cast member, hey, look, I'm part of this secret society. You get in your Doom buggy, and in certain scenes, it activated different on-ride audio for your experience. Like, this is awesome. For $199, if you were one of the lucky 999, this is amazing if you actually get to do this in the park.
That's basically like 3 churros.
There you go. It's 3 churros. And so the elements were Esmeralda on Main Street, who, by the way, told you your fortune multiple times that day for free. Normally that would,
Because you're saving money at this point.
Exactly. And then Silver Spur Music Box in Frontierland, Fowler's, Harbors, Rivers of America, and then the Doom Buggy speakers on the Haunted Mansion. Did it interact beyond Disneyland?
No.
Okay.
And the Fowler's Harbor effect is great because it hipped an entire generation of people to the best way to get to Splash Mountain from the Haunted Mansion, which is the secret side trail that is not full of looky-loos waiting for their family to come splashing down the mountain.
Yeah, so there were so many cool elements. So sorry to the Magic Kingdom folks who, let me tell you, they were pissed. And I don't kind of blame them because, this was exclusive to Disneyland. So none of that was available there.
To be honest, if you've grown up in a mansion where the stretch rooms go up instead of down, you're already never going to catch up. So...
Plus the humidity.
Yeah.
So you guys did a nice little job on this project, and it ended up winning a Thea Award for Outstanding Achievement. This is like the theme park entertainment sort of awards. And how did you guys hear about this?
I found out we were nominated after we won. I was like, hey, cool, I won something. And then you look it up. You're like, if you want to order a trophy, it's $230. I'm like, nope.
You had to buy your trophy?
I think they give one to the team, but you can order one for your personal bookshelf.
This is the reason we're having this panel is this award, because when the award was won, Sarah, who I just can't say enough good things about, made sure that every contractor was mentioned by name on it. And that releases us all from our non-disclosure agreement. So now I can disclose that I worked on the project, put it on my CV, and so on. Otherwise, I can't. So Sarah's, I can't say enough good things.
Her brain is next level, man.
Yeah, she really is one of the good ones.
So yeah, congratulations on that. This was so cool. Any final thoughts you want to share about the Ghost Post project?
For me, it was just great to be able to play in a sandbox. I mean, you look at the way themed entertainment is going now, people trying to add AR, VR, mixed reality, augmented reality, every type of reality. Ghost Post, along with things like Adventure Trading Company, which I was also part of for Imagineering, it were kind of like the early adopters of this. Like, how can we extend the story? How can we let guests and cast members play? This exposure to this type of world has really helped me in my career past this, because knowing how to set this up was it was a crash course, especially when you have people like Cory, Sarah contributing to the conversation. It's like free college. It's great.
And for me, I think one of the most distinctive things about it is the extent to which it encouraged fan-to-fan communication, right? These are puzzles that were meant to be solved online among people who had shared interests here, who might be strangers and who might come to know each other through it. And, you think about how much of the beloved kind of nerd culture of our day was rescued by fans who kept the torch alive, torch burning during the dark ages, Star Trek being revived by letter writing campaigns from fans. And, Disney has gone through many dark periods where it was financially in trouble, and it was the fans who kept it alive. And the fact that all this lore comes from so many different places and comes from fans and cast members who are fans and so on really is intrinsic to the story. Like, it couldn't have come any other way. It couldn't have come strictly in a top-down manner. It really had to be a collaboration among all the people who love it. I mean, the original Imagineers are long gone. I actually noticed this morning, because I go through my blog archives every day, we're at the 15th anniversary of the death of Harriet, what's her name? The first woman in
Burns?
Harriet Burns. It's the 15th anniversary of her death.
She was
right?
amazing.
So they're long gone, right? And so
Bob's downstairs.
Well, Bob's downstairs.
Bob Gurr's living forever.
The people who are building stuff these days are the people who grew up on this stuff, right? They're the second and third generation. I mean, we were talking about Exitencio's granddaughter, who works with my wife at Disney, being on your panel, and it has become this weird blended fanish enterprise where the inmates are running the asylum in all the best ways.
Yeah, you can always tell when a project is being driven by fans of that property. And it's you get the best results when you have a bunch of geeks making things for geeks.
And look at the merch downstairs for Haunted Mansion stuff that is being made by fans. There's some really good Haunted Mansion merch over the last 10 years or so, after, I think, a fairly dark period. But we're in like a new golden age, and it's not all coming from inside, Glendale, right? A lot of it is just fans doing really cool stuff.
And Kevin, how did you end up becoming like creating the Bible of Haunted Mansion? Like, how did that become yours?
The Ghost Czar.
Just the way everything kind of just shook out. There was a void that needed to be filled. For years, Tom Fitzgerald was a writer, then became a trade director executive, and he's an executive still to this day. Tom Morris was our go-to history guru, a guy who started the parks as a kid and worked all the way till his retirement at Imagineering. So a lot of times when people had questions about the history of the parks, they would go to Tom. But when Tom retired, it kind of came to me, having worked at the parks, working at Disneyland, the first 50 magical years, starring Steve Martin and Donald Duck, shows every 20 minutes. That's where I kind of started diving into the history of it all. And then just like my brain is also a stickler for continuity. And that's why I loved like the early Marvel stuff, because everything was just so connected perfectly. And if it didn't, they fixed it. And so I really was trying to this is the next opportunity. Let's connect as much stuff as we can. Let's make sure everything's tightened up, because there was so many different theories about Jungle characters, Tiki Room characters, Big Thunder characters, Society of Explorers and Adventurers characters, and nobody was manning the post. So I kind of just took it upon myself and offered myself up to do that. And at one point, to your yarn things. I was doing that with Society of Explorers and Adventurers. Like I had giant charts of, okay, who knows each other? Okay, so this person was born here. They died at this point, so they could not know this person. And yeah, my cubicle was insane.
That's awesome. And one thing I'll mention, since we got Halloween fans in the house, if you're a fan of the Cars Land overlay that happens for Halloween season, if you enjoy those parody posters as much as I do, you can thank Kevin here for that.
Also, the queue for Mickey and Minnie's in Tomorrowland? Or
In Toontown, yeah.
Runaway Railway.
Yeah, so I was the writer on the Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway queue, the El Capitan.
Thank you for working Honey, I Shrunk the Kids into that very much.
Oh, yeah, those movie posters. I can't believe they... what were the ones? Like, there's a couple... I'm surprised they let us do Rocketeer. Like, that was the big get for us. The rest of Toontown. I also did all the music for Mater and Luigi's Halloween and Christmas. So make sure you listen to that, because I get residuals.
I remember you came into my office once and said, is the Piranha Miracle offensive to Jews? And I was like, no, we'll love that.
Yeah.
We'll love it. Keep it in the Jingle Cruise.
Yeah, Jingle Cruise. Yeah, it's the piranhas are biting for 6 nights. It's a piranha.
Oh, Jingle Cruise. Excellent. Well, Kevin, Cory, thank you so much for telling us a bit about the Ghost Post. This was so much fun.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We enjoyed being had.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. If you'd like to hear more from Kevin Lively and what it's like working as a writer at Walt Disney Imagineering, listen to episode 905 of Disney Coast to Coast. I'll be sure to include that link in this episode's show notes. Don't miss any future episodes by subscribing and following Disney with a Z Coast to Coast on your favorite podcast app, where episodes are available 24/7. If you're a longtime listener of the show, thank you. And if you have the means, consider supporting the show over on Patreon. By joining Disney Coast to Coast's Patreon membership, you'll gain extra bonuses, including live stream Ask Me Anythings, unreleased episodes, and more bonus content. Take a look at all that's available by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description, and thank you for considering. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description. From additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!